Today, we're discussing science-based tips for knowledge retention. For my undergrad, I studied cognitive science, which is the study of the mind. And during my degree, we watched a lot of case studies for different mental disorders. It was heart-wrenching to watch Alzheimer's disease case studies. Alzheimer's disorder robs people of their memories, their experiences, and in some sense, the very essence of the memories that have formed who they are. So I panic every single time a family member or a friend loses their train of thought in the middle of a sentence or forgets what they did earlier that day.
I don't remember.
Anything memory related just terrifies me. And I don't know if it's just because I have a hypersensitivity to these kind of things, but I feel like I'm hearing this sentiment more and more and more as time progresses. Engrossed in a conversation and the person on the other side saying that they just lost their train of thought. There are too many Mondays where I don't remember what happened during the weekend. It is scary. It is uncanny how many memory concerns I've heard. I'm gonna look this up. Yeah, so actually the pandemic seems to have done something to our collective memory. Katie Couric Media released this article titled Beyond Brain Fog: What the Pandemic Has Done to Our Memory. If you've become more forgetful over the past 2 years, you're not alone. Researchers found a whopping 80% of people said some facet of their memories became worse since the world lockdown in 2020. Harvard psychology professor Daniel Schatzer. Let's see, how do you say this? Pronunciation. YouTube's awesome.
It is normally said as Schechter.
Oh.
Schechter. It has normally.
Okay. I don't know if I could do that. This professor says it has to do with living in that eerie period of the pandemic where most of us were confined to our homes, cut off from our normal activities, canceling our vacations, postponing major life events, and had to resort to binge watching Netflix day in, day out. Each day began to resemble the next, which is not helpful for remembering events. Memory generally benefits from distinctiveness. It's just harder to recall specific events when you don't have those everyday experiences that serve as distinctive markers like you normally would. It's making me sad. I will link this article below in case anyone wants to read more and some other related articles. But for now, let's get to the tips. So I wanted to share these tips and actually revisit a time period of my life where I felt like my memory was the sharpest. Sadly, this was actually sophomore year of high school, so years ago. So here we go. The first tip is to practice active learning. Active learning is actually a suite of learning techniques which essentially boils down to engaging with what you're learning. It is the difference between simply reading a book or watching a lecture and annotating or taking notes while you're watching said lecture. It is testing yourself and putting it in your own words and asking yourself questions. I mentioned that sophomore year is when I felt the sharpest. This was by no accident. Enhancing my creativity and memory retention was so important to me back then. So I would watch a TED Talk every morning and force myself to summarize the video in my own words without re-watching the video. What this forced me to do was meaningfully participate and actively engage and figure out what I wanted to retain and what was okay to discard. This was so hard at first, but as with anything, practice makes it easier. So through time, it did get easier and my mind felt sharper. Another thing I would do was at the end of each day, I would write down anything meaningful that I learned that day. This did the same thing. It forced me to actively participate during the day and think about what I wanted to write down at the end of the night. Nights where I didn't have much to write down actually made me realize how much we forget in just a single day's time. On the flip side, when I did remember, another benefit of writing down what I learned that day was I could revisit it the next day and the next week and the next year, which meant that I was able to further solidify that knowledge in my brain. Which leads me to my next topic, which is the forgetting curve and the importance of spaced intervals. The forgetting curve. The forgetting curve is a mathematical formula that originated in 1885. The curve demonstrated the rate at which information is forgotten over time if we don't attempt to retain it. Some studies suggest that humans forget approximately 50% of new information within an hour of learning it. That goes up to an average of 70% within 24 hours. Of course, this depends on several factors, including memory strength, how meaningful the material is, and physiological factors such as stress. The most important discovery made was actually by reviewing new information at key moments, you can reduce the rate at which you forget. This is referred to as spaced learning. So, the more frequently you review material, it is more likely to be in your long-term memory, make its home, get cozy, build itself a strong household up there in your long-term memory. Point is, visit it often so that it makes its home and feels comfortable to stay. I'd also say not to overwork yourself and try to review material over and over and over again and beat yourself up if you can't remember. I like to think of memory as a muscle. After working out, it needs some time to repair, and you want to work out in intervals. If we overwork our muscles, it could actually be detrimental to the progress. And the same could be said of memory, so do not burn yourself out. It is more important to have regularly spaced out intervals of reviewing. This actually seamlessly brings me to my next point, which is focused versus diffuse thinking. Focused thinking is quite self-explanatory. It is what we all strive for. The periods of focused, highly productive, deep work. However, the diffuse mode of thinking is equally important. It's when our minds are free to wander. It is our daydream mode when we form connections and subconsciously solve problems. Do you ever notice sometimes when you're mulling over a problem and you're beating your head against your desk and you're focused, but you cannot figure it out? You cannot figure out what is wrong, and then you decide to finally just go for a walk and take a break, and then all of a sudden it hits you. Or maybe that happens when you dreamt and you wake up and the problem was solved in your dream. Our brains are actually working in the background for us, and this is diffuse thinking. So a good balance of both is the key here. This article puts it so nicely. It is about combining creativity with execution. It also says, if we stay in a focused mode too long, diminishing returns set in and our thinking stagnates. We stop getting new ideas and can experience cognitive tunneling. It's also tiring and we become less productive. So how do we must make use of both of these? One way is to work in intense, short, deeply focused bursts. But when the ideas stop flowing in, do something conducive to mind wandering. The next topic is called interleaving. What this is instead of focusing on a single topic for too long, learning multiple, ideally tangential topics at the same time. This approach enhances the brain's ability to discriminate between topics, but also form connections. There's a 3-month study that involved teaching 7th graders slope and graph problems. One group of students had weekly sessions that were largely unchanged from standard practice. This means that one subject was learned and then the next topic was learned in succession. However, another group was taught using interleaving. When they tested these students, when the test was 1 day later, scores were 25% better for problems trained with interleaving. At 1 month later, the interleaving advantage grew to 76%. When our brain forms unique connections between topics and is able to discriminate the differences, it helps us retain and engage with the information on a deeper level. It provides us with this comprehensive view and this mental graph of where things fit. The last tip is to practice priming. You could also think of it as previewing or pre-reading. This is huge when it comes to reading scientific articles. Reading titles, subtitles, the abstract, looking at charts and the graphs, the conclusion, the results first before delving into the meat of it all does a world of a difference. Why? Priming helps you create a mental schema. When you have this basic framework, learning new information, your brain places that where it believes it belongs and it enhances long-term retention. If you delve deep into the material right away, your brain is not only learning the depth of knowledge, but also it's simultaneously trying to form that schema, and that is very difficult to do and counterproductive. This is the actual last tip, and that is teaching what you learn. When we're trying to learn something, we often fall into this trap of thinking, I'm not an expert, how can I teach someone else? That is the furthest thing from the truth. My favorite lecturer in college was a grad school student. Why? Because a lot of my professors suffered from what is called the professor knowledge gap. This phenomenon happens to experts in the field where they overestimate the amount that the students have on the subject matter. In an effort to keep things interesting, they may skip over foundational content, assume prior knowledge, or use technical jargon. So they say the best person to learn from is someone who is just a few steps ahead of you. They know in such a fresh way what was hard and how they bridged that gap. Also, I had this experience so often where I could not understand the material my teacher was teaching, but as soon as someone else asked for help, all of a sudden I understood it clearly. So I looked this up for the sake of this video, and this is an actual phenomenon called the protege effect. There are a few reasons why this happens. One is when you're teaching someone else, you're forced to think deeply about the material in order to explain it clearly. This deep processing leads to better understanding and memory encoding. There are more reasons outlined, but I wanted to point out this last one, social pressure. When someone asks for your help, there's a social pressure to provide accurate and helpful explanations. That is it for the day. If you want to immediately take advantage of these tips and practice them, go ahead and rewatch this video with the goal of summarizing in your own words and sharing with someone else. I would not recommend pressuring yourself to remember every single thing from this video. I would call it a win if you took 2 things away from this video and actively engaged with it and gave it the attention to be stored in your long-term memory. Sometimes when I try to keep everything and remember everything all at once, I end up not remembering anything at all. So the first watch of this video is the priming effect, where now you have this mental schema of what to expect, and the second watch is where you can actively engage. In case you want a few questions to think about, I would love to know also, so maybe leave in the comments below, what are the 2 concepts that resonated the most, and how would you want to apply them? And just to throw an educational question in the mix, what is the forgetting curve and how can we combat it? Otherwise, I hope this was helpful. I hope everyone goes out and actively engages in the content around them and also practices enhancing their memories. Would love to hear about what you'd want me to talk about for the next video. And if you go out and try these out in the world, let me know how it goes. Thank you once again for watching, and until next time.